After the incident with the teachers, all the humans, without saying anything, immediately rallied together. Everyone was surprised how efficient this was, as the males seemed to encircle the females, all of them with their arms raised, ready to strike out, some of them even using whatever implement they could get a hold of to use as some sort of crude weapon. They moved together in one big pack, falling back all to their training, some of them standing in ways that they were ready to use jinjitsu, others karate, some as though Krav Maga, and others simple boxing. They slowly retreat down the dorm rooms as many of the students slowly make their way towards them. None actually crazy enough to go in, because as they keep saying, they smell death. Something radiated from the humans. They didn't know why they could smell that, but they weren't exactly about to find out. But the draw of the heat made it very difficult to stay away. When the humans got to the main dorm room, they immediately locked themselves inside, dang near breaking the locking mechanism to make sure no one got in, and immediately called for assistance from the human consulate. After the consulate was done laughing at the situation that was being explained, they would immediately send something to help. The student body constantly would ask to be let in. They wanted to understand, but the humans would simply only communicate through voice and video. They would not allow anyone near them, although they did ask for food, but many times the Xenos would simply put the food down and wait for the door to open. This was not going to happen. They constantly kept telling the students, back away, back away. And in one instance, the door opened, and one of the males charged in and immediately found out what happens when you do against a human. That broad right hand came in solidly clenched together and knocked him completely back, flipping him actually backwards over his own tails and landing on the ground, completely unconscious. Even though this little bit of incident happened, the humans still seemed to be concerned about the teachers. One in particular who was still in a state of euphoria after the incident she had. It seemed as though in all the other classrooms they only had one human grab a hold, but she had to deal with three, and it was difficult for her to deal with it. But eventually the heat did radiate away. Many times this door would open just so the humans could check. Even down the hall, everyone could sense the heat radiating out. They didn't know how they could feel it, even through the doors, but they knew the humans were out and immediately opened the doors to see it. And then the humans would simply feel the heat as they walked by, as though in a trance. Many of them, once again, would try to get in, pressing the buttons, not realizing that the humans had done something to the locking mechanism. It wasn't going to work from the outside. A few students did try to hotwire the lock, but they couldn't understand what the humans had done. How did the humans know how to do something like this? And then they had to be reminded that these may look like human adolescents, but many of them are over a century old. They've learned a thing or two. And then when they tried to communicate with the humans, they would always make that strange sound that everybody realized was a human laugh, and would always reply with, "Old age and treachery will always beat out youth and exuberance." After 8 days of this dance, the packages finally arrived in huge crates and were delivered right towards the door. The humans once again had to tell everybody to get back, but no one wanted to stick around. They knew that these heavy packages were carrying something, they just weren't sure. What would be the true surprise, however, was the fact that even though these packages were so heavy, it took 3, 4, sometimes 6 or 7 students to carry them and to get them onto the carts to bring them over. When the door opened, the humans seemed to pick up the package, just one, and almost seemingly toss it right through the door to their buddy, saying, "Hey, this one's yours." The students and faculty were absolutely confused on what the humans were doing, what they could have received, but the answer would come soon enough. Within a few hours of receiving these crates, the humans eventually emerged from their own self-imposed exile. all of them wearing some sort of tight suit around them. It looked like an old school wetsuit, but it covered the entire body. There was gloves, boots, again covering all the legs, the torso, the arms. There was breathing holes in front to breathe through, of course, and there were goggles to see through, but the suit did cover the entire body. Everyone wanted to look close, and as they got close, they realized there was no heat coming out at all. This was surprising, especially as form-fitting as it was. They actually showed off the musculature, the large frame, and the curves of some of the students. The non-human students were absolutely surprised that no heat was coming out and even no smell. They were amazed. This was good stuff. Although the humans did complain it's either itchy or it's tight, it's uncomfortable, whatever it was. It did allow them to walk around with any problems. Immediately, they went to check on the teachers to make sure everybody was good, and all the teachers were thankfully back to themselves, although one was still having trouble getting her knees to operate correctly. They talked to the staff of the academy, and the need to adjust the class order so that the student body will fully understand human physiology and psychology first was paramount because they don't need another instance like this. It's already bad enough that throughout all of the societies, rumors are starting to spread, and they need to stop this crap because if it gets really bad, well, they have no idea how bad it can truly get. Saying this, they couldn't see the human faces, but their own movements gave away the fact that they were nervous about something. Showing this, everyone agreed. They agreed to the change in class order, not totally schedule, but order. And some request a more physical understanding, which all the humans realized what they meant and said, yeah, that's not going to happen at all. As the classes are reset, everyone could hear the humans arguing with each other. They were threatening each other with informing humanity as a whole of what happened to see what the hell would go on. Then immediately changed to making some sort of joke about, well, bestiality, whatever the hell that was. No one understood what it was, but they realized it was bad. It was definitely bad. Yet it seemed like none really took it that seriously, considering the tone of their voice, except for one, but he seemed to relax a little bit. It seems as though everybody need to understand the human biases on certain things, or this whole situation was going to get out of hand really quick. Those listening close heard the humans come to a consensus upon how to treat their new situation, and they were told to treat it like something they know as high school. Does that mean that the school is up in the clouds or maybe in the stratosphere like this academy? That would make sense. Why would they go to two of them? For the foreseeable future, the human students were not exactly thrilled that they would have to wear the suits at all times outside their dorms rooms. A few of the males started laughing suggestively at doing certain things like releasing their body heat just a little bit by certain females, although this idea was completely stopped in its tracks due to everyone telling them that trying to seduce someone with your body heat is tantamount to drugging potential partners. This made all of them pause. Again, none of the non-human students could see faces, but they could hear the tone. And they had come to realize that when human students all get quiet all of a sudden, they might want to pay attention. During the new human biology lessons, there was always going to be a human present. They didn't actually have to take the class, but instead, they more or less taught it, fitting in all the small blanks that were not filled in by the teacher. In many cases, a human would sit there and simply address the entire class, breaking down all the different parts. In the human history, also always had a human present. However, this one rotated more often than the biology class, just because they found out that human history is very, very complex, as human history has almost never, ever, 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 ever had a central government system, which means many different histories were written over time, and there has to be a way to coalesce. In each class, it didn't matter if this was for human history, biology, sociology, or whatever, there was always a strange black bipedal figure that seemed to be around, waiting to answer questions or sitting in the back, sometimes not moving for a long time, and this made many of the students a little nervous as they believed that maybe the human students left. Are these androids? What, did they replace them? What's going on? The suits also seemed to have a universal look, being solid black from top to bottom. The only thing you could see was the very outline of the eyes, but only if you got close. And it was difficult to tell everyone apart at first glance. However, everyone started to realize to look for things like the way they walked, the way they moved, the tone of the voice. That would definitely give someone away. One particular biology class, it seemed like every single student and teacher showed up for, as they wanted to understand this fully. The students in particular were amazed and yet some disappointed, as they realized that reproductive organs on the humans don't match all other species. Although this was to be expected, it did put a little bit of them in a bit of a snit. Some realized why, that the squid male had gotten beat up by the human. It was simple confusion, as the fact that the squid, as the humans call them, don't have external parts. Everything is internal. Had the human treated the squid male like a female, there was a high chance of damage. Reason being is that the male squid openings, and there is an opening, are a bit smaller than the females by about 50%. And they are very sensitive and are not quite designated for insertion, which all in all means that the squid would have felt pleasure, would have felt immense pleasure, but only for a moment, as something would have torn. And with the constant back and forth as they found out the way humans do things, it would have been devastating. It actually would have been detrimental. Even though they would have been euphoric due to all the heat, the actual damage to the body might have led to catastrophic consequences. This was also a similar situation to the avian species that the humans call the hawks. One of the human males actually helping to give this class turned over towards the hawks and the squids and said, "I don't know why you two don't try reproduction with each other," which immediately made both groups look at each other and then turn away with disgust, some of them shaking in disgust, others just fluttering their feathers. As one side would say, "Ew, feathers, those are disgusting," and the other side saying, "Lack of feathers? Oh, gross. Ew." Typical high school shit. After calming down from that, the rest of the species didn't say it, but they enjoyed the idea of possibly getting closer and getting physical with the humans. What the humans didn't know is that once word went out of how the human heat would affect them, many of their own governments had gotten contact with them and tried to persuade them to attempt such physical activities. The humans had an idea that this would happen, but nothing was actually confirmed. As good as their spies are, nobody's that good to know everything at every single time. After this class, although the reasons vary, it's not difficult to hear all the students gossip and speculate. In fact, many of them are so loud that humans don't even have to be close to hear them. They could hear everyone talk about things that are including, but not limited to, human muscle size and strength of the arms and legs. Depending on the species, male or female might be dominant. They didn't know how the humans would actually deal with that. Which one was it? They knew that the females can be just as fierce as the males, even though they tend to be a little smaller. Some of them talked about the amount of fur on a human, lack thereof, and the human's penchant for removing much of their fur, or sometimes coloring their fur to attract others. They also talked about certain squishy bits of the human body. Many of the males of other species wanted to examine these such parts of the human females. The idea that humans did not actually have a mating cycle mean they're constantly goers, and this made the entire student body interested because they realized that at any given moment a human could be ready to go and go and go like some sort of battery powered rabbit. Yet certain parts of the body made everyone look at them as though they're strange and a bit large. In particular, the human manipulators that they call hands tend to be much larger than most anyone else. They worried about this, and yet they remembered how the humans could simply pick up something heavy and throw it like it was not even there, like it was no gravity attached to it at all, and seemingly be able to catch things that are larger than they are, absorbing the hits. How do they do that? And yet they thought, well, if they could catch something like that, what could they do to us? Teehee. Many professors had questions as well and offered to be test subjects. This was, of course, denied, but they could hear the indecision in the voice of the humans many times. After getting a hold of certain materials, they believed that they could present themselves certain ways to entice the humans, and did so, causing the human males to have certain physical changes which were completely noticeable no matter how much they tried to hide it. This also caused the human males to immediately excuse themselves and go exercise. It got so bad that it seemed as though when not in class or eating, the human males were exercising constantly, and it did not take long for the females to join them too. Human social psychology put a damper on many of the ideas, as human ideals had actually changed over time, especially with the fact that they had used technology to regress their age, and now random hookups, as everyone believed they were called by human nomenclature, even though that's not what they were called anymore, are now considered a bit distasteful by human standards. It was the same as humans explained in certain areas where certain mind altering narcotics used to be completely legal and everyone would flock to it from around the world. And yet the locals would look at those who did this and look down on them as they were lower on the social ladder. Not to mention the fact that when humans spread out, they found out that certain STDs would actually kill off entire colonies. Though some expected that this was an alteration of previously known viruses to become a bioweapon, it was enough to scare the majority of the human populations on all colonies to include Earth to keep it in their pants. Humans have also become very restrictive in this sense due to them now living pretty much indefinitely, except for a random act of violence or a simple random event. In current human society, this means that damaging your body in such ways actually lowers your societal standard. There was also one major factor that no one could have foreseen until the class. They found out that human pair bonding is a major factor in their lives. They had to understand that breaking off relationships is painful. Everyone understands this. But breaking relationships with a lover can actually be lethal to humans in extreme cases, as they will self delete themselves, and it is not something that they want to push. When humans first experience their most intimate actions, it sets the tone pretty much for the rest of their life unless something else happens. For many, especially females, the very first time they use the intimate action, they pair bond with someone at such a deep level that there is no breaking away. That one could do some of the most egregious things and the female will stay with them. Many of the species did not quite understand this. The males had to jump in and shift it a little so that the females weren't being overwhelmed with questions. They simply stated how males pair bond too, and they pair bond very deep. They just don't show it. That's just part of the human condition. But tell you what, if we pair bond with somebody and they're in trouble, we will move the heavens, we will move the hell, we will break apart stars to save our own people. This made everyone pause, made everyone realize that humans actually run much deeper. And the humans kind of laughed, and everyone asked why. They would simply reply with the same old phrase, still waters run deep. No one understood that, but they do know that humans speak in a lot of metaphors. The part that made the student body pause, completely just pause and stop, was the revelation that humans are actually very visual creatures when it comes to assessing mates. They're actually attracted by shapes. Nobody understood this is because the majority of other species are either drawn in by colors or by aromas. Shapes don't really matter to them. Maybe the weight of one of their spouses to know if they're old enough, maybe fertile enough to produce offspring, but shapes? They were amazed to hear that when looking for a male to mate, the females look for a V or a Y, wide on top and narrowing down, along with a strong base. Some asked about an X, and everybody said, if your legs are open that far, something's stuck up your ass. The Xenos didn't get it, but every human in the class laughed their ass off. Then they talked about what they look for in a female, and they said, oh, well, yeah, you just look at the figure eight. With that, they actually had to draw a figure eight. Yeah, it's either like this or what we call an hourglass, as he drew it on there. They then looked over at some of the females in their form-fitting suits and realized that all of them had this similar shape. Some a little wider, some a little thinner, but it was there. As each of the species come to this realization, they all looked at themselves, looked at their brethren, and they started to believe that there would be no way to get the humans out of their protective shells. Not anymore. This is why, for over a quarter of the solar cycle, the humans were able to maintain a sort of status quo. There were still a few of the student body that were completely intrigued by the human heat and just wanted a small taste, just a little bit to understand what everybody was freaking out about. They wanted to know this, more or less, so they could return all the information back to their people. But the humans maintained themselves inside their shells and kept them themselves as much as possible. That was until the break. When the break occurred, all the humans stayed inside the school, inside the dorms, due to the fact there just wasn't any transportation going back to Earth at that time. Many of the others did go home to see their families and pretty much get debriefed by their governments, but about 12% of the entire student body, along with the teachers, stayed. The break itself, at least for humans, was going to be 15 and a half days, which was basically half a solar month when you break it down. While the break was happening, the humans would converse with those that stayed. Now that everybody was more in a leisurely setting, everyone thought, okay, we'll just sit there and talk. All the teachers, of course, remained as it was part of their contract, and they wished all the students would just leave so they could have some time. They wished for a bit of downtime from everyone else. They wished for no issues to occur. But when they said this, one of the humans overheard this and simply stated, yep, wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which gets filled first. The human students had zero time to themselves, even on break. They had to group together for protection all the time, so they weren't ever alone. They shared living spaces with each other, classes with each other, and even had to share washrooms with open bays. It was kind of bad when one person is taking a shower 3 feet from somebody taking a shit. So it was actually nice for them to just get away from their own people for a while and just talk with others. In the cafeteria, usually they sit alone just with their own thoughts, at least for a while. Other species would usually come and join them, those that didn't go home. The human suit did allow them to eat, as they could actually move the mouthpiece and expose the mouth so they could eat. They would cover it immediately, though, because as it turned out, just exposing that much was just enough bioheat to get everyone, even on the other side of that small 4 individual table, to lean forward more and more and more, even without realizing they're doing so. For several days, certain humans would talk with certain non humans. It seemed as though they planned to meet during their meals, though most people thought nothing of it. Miss J actually would sit there and talk with Allie, as they both liked chit chatting with each other. On one day, both of them noticed that John and Sven were at different tables on other ends of the cafeteria, and they were with 2 non-human females. One each, of course. Although, when they both seemed to get up and leave, Allie turned her head sideways, looked at them both, and then started to giggle. And giggled hard. She couldn't keep her laughter to herself. Miss J asked, "What's wrong?" as her betrothed actually came and sat down to actually share a meal now they have some downtime and they could hang out together. Her betrothed was a male slick, of course the same species as her, which has much shorter head tendrils than she does, and the males don't have the tentacles coming out of their sides like the females do, but they do have a very long and flexible tail, almost like a big rat tail, but not quite as wide as you would think, but it does have a lot of dexterity. He was, of course, confused, as he's just now getting part of this conversation. He listened as Allie finally got herself settled and stated, "Things are about to get very loud in the dorms." Before Allie even finished with the rest of her explanation, her betrothed, named Gelkato, cut in and claimed, "It could not be that serious." Allie said, "I'll show you, if you would please present your tail." She said this as she simply raised her hand up, palm up, and extended it forward as though she was waiting for him to plop his tail right in the palm of her hand. John was being led to a dorm room by the one he found attractive. The laddie female led the way, annoyed that her shell roommate was actually still there when they walked in. John was surprised with the amount of carapace pieces all over the floor. "What the hell is this? I'm walking on eggshells," he said. Everyone kind of looked at him weird, because that's almost an insult, but they realized that it meant something else in human. The shell female showed that she had just molted, and now she had a far more feminine shape. As she stood up, he could see that her body was now much more hourglass shaped. This included what seemed to be a pair of mammaries up front, and as he said that, she kind of covered herself and turned, and all he could say is, "Ooh, baby got back, too." She had no idea what the hell he was talking about, though, and was just looking at him confused. She came back to herself and simply explained that even though she had molted, her outer shell parts had not fully hardened yet, and she couldn't leave. This was a natural reaction in her species, and of course John understood this, because that's how the rest of the crustaceans actually operate. They need to shed their shell every once in a while and then wait a bit for it to harden. After less than a minute of contemplation, talking back and forth between, they told the shell that, well, if you got nowhere else to go, you could just join us. She simply looked at them and said, "For what?" John reached up and grabbed the small tab that he had to pull down to open his suit. It peeled away, but there was no zipper. This actually sealed up perfectly. As he zipped it all the way down from the side of his neck, crossways across his body to the side of his waist on the opposite side, the room filled with the heat coming off his chest as he pulled the suit open, revealing all the muscle tone he'd been working on trying to break all his frustrations due to all these girls being very interested in him. As he peeled off the mask from his face and the goggles hit the ground, once again another burst of heat entered the room. Along with that, The aroma that came off, that you would think would be absolutely disgusting, which did curl John's nose just a little bit, seemed to be almost intoxicating for the ladies. There were no more questions in that room. Sven had actually got close to a tabby that had a surprise of her own. It was her roommate. A cell that was so happy to be part of this, both of her tails were actually wagging when they walked in. Her tail shot straight up, though, as the feeling of heat, as Sven did the same thing, peeling off the suit, but this time he didn't do it slow. He just simply cranked it open and flipped it off, cursing in his own home language how he hated wearing the thing because it didn't breathe for shit. But with that, well, ring the bell, game on. While this was just starting, Allie had opened up the face area of her mask, now that she had Galkoto's tail, and put it on the side of her face, just holding for a few seconds. With that, the heat radiated up his tail, and he was immediately in a state of euphoria. The heat had radiated up his tail all the way to his pelvic region and actually started messing with all the stuff in that area. Seeing this, Allie pushed the tail away, not hard, but did, and immediately raised up the front of her mask. The girls would sit there and talk for another minute while her betrothed was just absolutely stunned and couldn't understand what he was feeling. His mind wasn't even with him at that point. The girl talk quickly de escalated and straight into the gutter as Allie started to ask how rigid Miss J can make her tentacles. For only a moment, Miss J was confused why she needed to know, but then understood the context. She then looked again confused and asked Allie, in class it was stated that females only like males for such purposes. Allie tried to stop the grin from appearing underneath her suit, but responded, usually that's true. However, it's far more commonplace and acceptable for girls to experiment. Miss J suddenly sprang up. Shall we conduct this experiment away from prying eyes? As she looked around the cafeteria as more and more had realized what the conversation was going to. They got up, and as they walked away, Ally turned to Galkato and said, you're coming too. He suddenly snapped back to reality, and he was out of his seat like somebody had shocked him in the ass with a stun gun. Before they even got to Miss J's room, they actually passed by Lance, another human, with a Bly female who had actually reached her tail and wrapped around his waist and was pulling him along towards her room. Everybody knew this because the Bly live in a particular area. And even though Lance was still wearing his suit, there was absolutely no question what they were about to do. At Miss J's room, she was amazed at the revelation of Allie's face after so long when she pulled off the mask. When the suit was opened pretty much the same way, Allie slowly removed it and opened it, teasing, barely letting the heat escape at first and building it up, and eventually it overshadowed the reveal of curves and the squishy bits that they had all heard about. After she started to disrobe, she actually realized that the other two were absolutely so stunned as their bodies were reacting not only to the heat but to the aroma that came off as well, that they were just standing there like statues. She had to remind them it's better if they're not wearing anything either. Now, granted, Miss J's species doesn't wear much, but it's amazing how fast it came off at that point. After they disrobed, they all just kind of stood looking at each other. Allie, still keeping her wits about her, walked in between the two and facing Miss J, surprised Miss J by reaching up, grabbing her face like she had done before, and gave her a deep kiss right there. Miss J's tentacles reached up and around, usually not doing this, went and wrapped around Allie's torso to pull her closer. As they did, Allie reached behind her with one hand, grabbed Calico and pulled him right into her back. She released from Miss J, who was absolutely flabbergasted at the feelings going through her body right now as her eyes slowly moved forward towards Allie again. Allie simply looked and said, "Now, let's see what you two can actually do." Hello, everybody. This is Syntex. Thank you so much for joining me on today's chapter. Before I go, I gotta send out a huge thank you to one of my supporters, and that is the Sir. Thank you, sir, so much for supporting the channel. I greatly appreciate it. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntex, ejecting.